مش لوحدك.
Well, you're going to show us today how to plan ahead in case of disaster hits California. Now, everybody reacts to disaster differently.
Correct.
What is the safest or, I guess, reasonable? I know it's just nothing is reasonable, you know, when disaster hits, basically, because you know everybody reacts differently. But what is the best way to deal with a disaster when it hits?
Well, there are specific responses to certain kinds of emergencies that are a little different from emergency to emergency. But since we're talking earthquake, that's an area where there's a lot of confusion, and people will hear a newscaster say one thing, or a fire department official say one thing, and maybe another public safety official say something else, and Aunt Susie says something else. And there's a lot of sort of credibility gap. Who do I believe?
Right.
And one of the things that came out of the scientific study was the formation of what was originally the Great Southern California Shakeout. There's now the Great California Shakeout. It's a statewide drill, but it's also being adopted by other regions in the United States and around the world. And one of the first goals of that was to really help people understand what it is that will help them stay safe during the shaking. And one of the problems that we have is that the people will often react by running. We get the adrenaline hits, we hit the fight, flight, or flee, fight or fight, flight or fight. I'm not saying this correctly, but you get this surge of adrenaline and people want to move.
Right.
But running, of course, is one of the worst things that you can do, because in a strong shake, especially if you're in any close proximity to where the quake is happening, you will basically only have maybe 2.6 to 3 seconds to protect yourself.
Wow.
And if the shaking is strong, if you're trying to move on your feet, there's no way you can move on your feet without lifting one of them to transfer from foot to foot.
Right.
And the shaking was often so strong that it will throw people to the ground. And in that, that's how people typically break arms and legs and dislocate joints and so on. And also during that interval, as things are starting to let go, particularly inside our structures, windows breaking and maybe dangling chandeliers and things maybe letting go or whatever, books flying off shelves, whatever those things are that are flying and falling in the room, the longer you stay on your feet, the more you're going to be a target.
But what do you do? I mean, personally, when in Northridge earthquake, I remember, I was at home and I just ran to the front door. You know, you just, you're scared. But what if I'm in the middle of a building, you know, 9 floors, 20 floors? What do? You just sit still, stand still? What do you do?
In almost every situation, and there are a few exceptions, but in almost every situation, the drop, cover, hold on behavior is really the most effective thing to use. And I'll elaborate a little bit if you'll allow me.
Absolutely. Go ahead, please.
That instinct to run, of course, you don't really have time to get from point A to point B, no matter what kind of a building you're in or where you are. But let's take a look at this slide now, and let me ask you, how many things do you think might fall off this building if you were trying to run to the outside of the building when it was shaking?
Probably a lot. As looking at it, oh yeah.
Absolutely.
A lot of things, yes.
You can see all kinds of things which shed off the roof, the awnings and signs and all kinds of
Lights
things.
and, oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But one of the biggest things is also glass. And glass tends to implode or explode in about, again, 2.6 to 3 seconds.
Oh.
And so what we find, as you saw on that screen we had been looking at, was that there is more rubble that tends to accumulate at the outside edges of a building. Let's look at the screen again. And the most common type of structural collapse in earthquakes is when the outer wall sheds away.
Really?
Really. So people who are attempting to run, if the quake doesn't knock them down first, who are attempting to run from the inside to the outside building, will actually be finding themselves in the zone where the highest amount of debris is most likely to accumulate and potentially injure or kill them.
مش لوحدك.